We are back on Janet Mefford today, and it was 90 years ago this month that the Hebron riots of 1929 took place. It was carnage. It was jihadist carnage, and sad to say, the Soviet communists were cheering it on. And this is important history for us to understand, particularly in light of the fact that we're seeing the developments in the Democrat Party that we are, where you have people who are openly endorsing socialism, joining hands with people like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, endorsing the BDS movement. There's a lot of overlap there. And I want to play, before we get into this next segment, Dr. Andrew Bostom is with me, Islamic expert and author. And I want to play for people, Representative Mo Brooks, you unearthed this, Dr. Bostom, but he spoke out recently on the Jeff Poor show about this trend of questioning the alliance that the United States has with Israel. I want people to listen to this clip.
There is, and I think it's based on the growing influence of the Islamic religion in the Democratic Party ranks. Keep in mind that Muslims, more so than most people, have great animosity towards Israel and the Jewish faith. And as you have more and more Muslims in the United States, as they gain greater and greater influence in elections, particularly within Democratic Party primaries, then you're going to see more and more people like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and company that are anti-Israel, and that brings an entirely different viewpoint into the United States Congress. And this is going to be, I think you're going to see this influence in the Democratic Party grow and grow and grow over time, and ultimately become the dominant influence within the Democratic Party, where the Democratic Party will eventually become very strongly anti-Jewish and anti-Israel.
Oh, that's pretty terrifying. What's your reaction to that, Dr. Bostom? What do you think? Do you think he's right?
I think he's not only is he absolutely right, he is singularly courageous in stating things in such an unemotional, rational way. I mean, Janet, we've been over this before, but if you look at the best data on anti-Semitic attitudes in the world, done by a very left-wing organization. Let's face it, the Anti-Defamation League is a very left-wing organization, but they developed an instrument to gauge anti-Semitism by listing anti-Semitic stereotypes and judging the agreement with those. You had to agree with at least 6 out of 11 of these anti-Semitic stereotypes to even register as a case. So it's a very, very specific instrument. It's not terribly sensitive, but it's picking up extreme anti-Semitism. So if you agreed with 6 of these anti-Semitic tropes, then you were an index case. And when they applied this instrument across the world, the 16 most anti-Semitic countries in the world were all in the Muslim Middle East, where 74 to 93% exhibited this extreme anti-Semitism. When you look at Muslims worldwide as a religious group, they're anywhere from 2 to 4.5-fold more anti-Semitic on this scale in terms of the prevalence of anti-Semitism than any other religious group, and it applies in Western Europe and even in the United States, which is much more philo-Semitic overall. 34% of Muslims already in this survey had extreme anti-Semitism versus only 14% of the general U.S. population, again, consistent with the worldwide pattern, which is almost a 2.5-fold excess in this country. So he's touched on this exactly, and he also is courageous and wise enough to say it's, quote, based on the growing influence of the Islamic religion.
Yeah.
Well, again, we've discussed this. There's unfortunately very, very harsh anti-Semitic themes in the Quran, in the traditions of Muhammad, reinforced to this day by the most renowned teaching institutions in Islam. So obviously, that's the most logical place for these attitudes to have been generated. And Congressman Brooks really has to be applauded. And, I don't know how much attack he's gotten. I've seen a little bit, from the usual suspects. But what's amazing is unfortunately he's alone in coming out and making these clear statements and tying it to these Muslim congresswomen.
Yeah, he is. Well, she came out on Twitter. Ilhan Omar mocked Mo Brooks and said that when he made these comments about more Muslims in office will lead to more anti-Semitism, and she accused him of being bigoted, of course. And then she said also, if they're losing their minds over 3 Muslims in a body of 535, wonder what happens when there is 20 or more. Now, some people might say, yeah, good leftists, oh yeah, how bigoted is Mo Brooks? But what does happen when we get 20 or more in Congress? That's my question. Or 25 or 35 or 20, more than that. I mean, we're up to 50, 100. I'm not saying that we would be, but it only grows. It only gets worse.
Just look at again. Go calmly back to the ADL data, and they'll tell you what's going to happen. I mean, this is why people have to begin to think logically and unemotionally about this. If there's such a disproportionate prevalence of extreme, and again, this is extreme anti-Semitism in Muslim communities worldwide. If you bring more Muslims into this country, if more Muslims in this country get elected into Congress, then unless they're selectively enlightened Muslims, you're going to have more anti-Semitism. It's just logical. And in terms of the nexus with Marxism, socialism, there's a very interesting sort of tidbit, between the 1929 and 2019, going back to 1986, and hat tip to Diana West for finding this. But in her analysis, The Red Thread, she reports how Christopher Steele, now infamous for the anti-Trump dossier, when he was running the famous Union Debating Society at Cambridge University as an open, Marxist socialist at that point in his life, young man, he invited the then outlawed PLO, which was clearly a Marxist jihadist organization in 1986, to come to Cambridge basically to debate Israel's existence as a Jewish state. And this wonderful Knesset member, Jula Code, who was invited to be, represent the Israeli side of this so-called argument, she just eviscerated him in her reply to Union President Christopher Steele, the sole dialogue to which I would be a partner with an official representative of the PLO, an organization I consider neo-Nazi in character in that it slaughters Jews merely for being Jews, would be one in which he stood in the dock of an Israeli courtroom, unquote. I mean, but here you see the elements of this same lasting alliance in someone who's now well known for other reasons, Christopher Steele.
Right, but now this anti-Semitism that we've seen from these Muslim congresswomen, for example, they're darlings of the left. They're part of the squad, so they're anti-Trump and they're good tools that the left believes against Trump. But the question is, we have seen such a pro-Israel foreign policy from this president, unlike we've seen in many, many, many years. And it really is the case that if another progressive is able to get into the White House, our stance toward Israel will definitely not be so friendly, and all we have to do is go back to the Obama years to remember that. So
exactly.
What is that?
Obama.
Yeah, what is that spell if a progressive gets into the White House next time around? I mean, Israel, that's extremely troubling. I would imagine from their standpoint.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're going to go back to the Obama years, maybe worse. I mean, look at it's very interesting to see someone like Sanders, who frankly, I could see having worked for in 1929, he would have been working for the Marxist newspaper that was putting out the Sturmer-like cartoons. I'm sorry, but that's I look at him and that's I see him through that same prism. This is a man who I think is openly anti-Israel, and again, could sort of slough it off on the usual tropes of the left. But absolutely, it's frightening to see when you look at these Democratic candidates, and a Biden I don't think would be much better, honestly, and frankly it doesn't look like he's going to go anywhere at this point. But sure, all of them are so hard left now that you'd see basically a recapitulation of the Obama policies and maybe worse.
No, which is the last thing we need, because it's been wonderful to see the kind of progress that we've been able to make under President Trump and the friendliness toward Israel. And I remember this during the Obama years, just putting my head in my hands at times and thinking, I hope the Jewish people can see through this, that President Obama does not represent good patriotic Americans in this policy. It was just embarrassing to have him as the president.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Jewish community in the United States, there's a, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm in a distinct minority the way I view these things. It's shocking. I hope the Tlaib Omar thing serves to educate those that have been stubbornly in denial about this phenomenon. But I don't know, Janet. I'm not overly optimistic,
Well,
unfortunately.
I agree with you there, but great work as always, Dr. Andrew Bostom. Good to talk to you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. We really, really appreciate your being here again.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, you too.